Alright, so we just finished the Tinder bundle video. Now we're going to go on to the fun stuff. We're going to get our hand drill set burned in, and we're going to make a fire. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to pick a spindle to use. Earlier we made 3 spindles, all of horseweed. They're all pretty good, so I'm just going to pick one. That'll be ultimately the one we use. And for that, mostly I'm just going to sight it down, see which one's straightest, because they're all about the same otherwise. See if I can bend out a little of bends in this piece, because I actually do like this one. And there we go, that's pretty straight. So we're going to use this spindle. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to make a small pilot hole on the fireboard. To do that, we're going to use the tip of the knife. And I have a lot of experience with this, so I don't measure it out every time. But to measure it out, put your spindle about 1/8 or, I don't know, like up to 1/4 of an inch from the edge of your fireboard. And that's going to be where you want your hole. Something I didn't mention when we were crafting the set or talking about what a hand drill was in the first video, I didn't really talk about ratio of spindle diameter to fireboard size, which is a pretty important thing. In that it's not important. As long as your fireboard is wider than your spindle, that is all it needs to be. I like really wide fireboards so I can use up both sides, but it doesn't need to be. So I've got a pilot hole started right here. So now I'm going to burn in my set. And real quick, I need to just chamfer off the bottom point on here. It doesn't need to be an actual point, it just needs to be rounded, and then it'll burn into a full round shape. With a bow drill, you can put a point and a tiny little hole on your board, and the mechanics of it will get everything set for you. With a hand drill, you have to do it all yourself. You don't have the mechanical advantage of that bow and that socket. So if you can make a slightly rounded tip on the bottom of your spindle, you'll be better off. So, for this burn-in, I'm going to use the sitting stance. I don't like the sitting stance for actual hand drilling, like the actual act of making a fire with a hand drill. But for burning in, it'll work fine. So I'm going to show you the hand motions that we use for a hand drill. So you want to use as much of your hand as possible. There's a technique called floating where you move one up and one down at the same time. This keeps your hands in one spot on your spindle. I don't necessarily love floating. For me, it's pretty tiring and isn't the most efficient. I will do it to warm up a set, but I don't recommend trying to learn it until you're proficient. It took me a couple years of off and on practice before I was okay at floating. So instead, I'm going to teach what's called the caveman style, which is as simple as it gets. You're going to be spinning between your hands and pushing down as you go. When you get to the bottom, you trap it, you go back up, and you keep going. You're not going to worry about floating. You're just going to worry about getting it spinning and moving and getting the motion. I'm getting a little bit of smoke, which means my burn-in is starting. So I'm going to do this pass, and we're going to call that it. So now the spindle and the fireboard are mated together. They are burned in. So our next step is going to be cutting in our notch. So I'm going to move so you can hopefully see this. I'm going to take my knife and bisect that hole. I'm going to find the middle point and make a mark. That is roughly the middle of my notch, or of my groove, my burned-in divot. Words are hard, guys. So from here, I'm going to go in from either side, make a couple small cuts and pop out the chip. And now that is a guide. There are 2 different styles of notch. I carve square notches, or there's more than 2. 2 standard styles. I carve square notches mostly. I find them to be more efficient because your spindle gets better contact with the punk. But triangular notches or Pac-Man or pie notches or whatever you want to call them work just fine. So I'm going to carve a square notch. but all my square notches start out triangular. So I'm going to ride those same marks down the edge of my board like this. That's going to be my guidelines. My notch will not be wider than that. So now I'm just simply going to carve it out. I'm going to separate the fibers and pop them out with the knife. Real easy peasy. If you have any degree of carving ability, any carving skill whatsoever, this shouldn't be difficult for you. It doesn't take all that long. If you've never used a knife before, it might take you a little bit longer. The first few notches might be pretty ugly. That's okay. As long as they work, they don't necessarily have to be pretty. I can guarantee that all of the notches carved with stone for thousands of years weren't always very pretty. So I've got a triangular notch carved in here. What I do to turn my triangle into a square is simply go in and make small scooping cuts to square it. And that is all there is to notch work. I brought it right about to the center, just a tiny bit shy of center. You don't want to go all the way with some materials because then it'll form what's called a nipple, where the middle of your spindle isn't burning and it's just pushing material through. With pithy materials like this, it's not as big a deal, but it does still happen, especially with seep willow. So, to make sure that my notch is carved well, this is something I figured out myself after failing at a demonstration 7 times in a row. I take my spindle and put it in my divot and look from the bottom, and if I can see about 1/3 of that spindle, I know my notch is cut deep enough. So it's almost there, needs a little more material taken out at the bottom. And so just going to clean out the bottom of the notch. And we'll look at it again. Now that's looking pretty good. I don't know if I'll be able to get it to show well. You can see about 1/3 of the spindle. So that is good to go. So the last thing I do with my notch is I take the spine of my knife, the back, not the sharp part, and I rub it through the notch to smooth it down. That way there's nothing that's going to get the coal stuck. And now we can get going. So I'm going to demonstrate my preferred stance for hand drill. I already showed the sitting stance and mentioned that I don't really like it much. So what I'm going to show you now is a variation of the kneeling stance. The kneeling stance is similar to using a bow drill, where you've got one foot on the board and you're working on the inside of your leg. That's fine, it's great. That's a fantastic way to do it. What I like a little bit better is using another piece of wood to hold down my fireboard. That way I can bear down on it with my whole body weight. One last thing we'll need is a coal catch. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a piece of material that won't conduct heat away from the coal. I usually just use a little chip of bark. Some people will make nice coal catches and carry them around, make a dedicated coal catch, or use their knife even. I don't do that. I've never really found much of a need to carry a full-time coal catch, but your mileage may vary. It's all up to you. So, what do? We put this in here and just spin it away, right? Wrong. First things first, we make sure we have the right end in the board. This is our burning end. This is our top. Our burning end goes on our divot and stays in our divot the entire time until we have a coal. We don't pull it out, because if we pull the spindle out of that divot, it loses all the heat that we just built. So, what do? We make our hands really stiff out like this and use just the bottom edge, right? No, wrong. We use the full length, keep our hands fairly soft. Like, if you stiffen it out all the way, you get rid of all this padding in your hand, Whereas if you keep your hands mostly soft, there's a bit of padding. It'll keep you from blistering up as quickly anyway. I have pretty thin hands, and I've been doing this a long time, so I've got a lot of calluses, but I'll still blister up fairly easily if I'm not careful. So we're going to use long hand strokes while we're warming it up. Ultimately, I do use less of my hand when I'm actually doing the work, but for warming up, nice long strokes. We're already getting a little bit of smoke. Trap it and go back to the top. I'm going to pick up our speed as we see more smoke. Trap and go up. Now we're going to pick up more speed and more pressure. Alright, I have a coal. How do I know? I've got smoke coming from my dust pile, not from the spindle. It might not be very easy to see on camera. Let's see if I can shade it a little bit. I've got a fair bit of smoke coming up from my coal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pump my spindle in the hole to force oxygen to it. And that'll help the coal stick together a little better, help it coalesce. I'm going to bring my tinder bundle to me. Keep holding my fireboard down and tap the opposite edge of the board to free my coal. And carefully lift my fireboard away. I always feed it any extra punk that built up on the board. So now I've got time. Don't have to rush. I do need to keep this protected from the wind. It's a very windy day. I'm bringing my tinder bundle to my coal. See if I can show you guys that. There we go. I'm going to carefully dump that right in the middle, right into the target area of the tinder bundle. So now I've got all the time in the world. I can leave this sitting in here for a good few minutes and it won't go out. It'll just keep on smoldering. I'm going to give it some breath so it can start burning that fine material just a little bit. Now we're smoking good. The more smoke you see, the harder you can blow. I'm going to readjust my tripod real quick, and I'll show you how I bring it to flame from here, and we'll put it in our tinder bundle once it's burning. I said tinder bundle. I meant our fire lay once it's burning. Alright, so I've got it burning pretty well in here. What I'm going to do now is called the figure 8 technique. I'm going to be waving my tinder bundle in wide figure 8s with the mouth facing the direction that it's moving. This gives it a constant flow of oxygen. I don't have to use my breath for this. I don't have to tire myself out at all. Just got to keep it moving. And then every once in a while I stop and give it some breath manually. Keep it moving. And here pretty soon I'm going to be holding a fire in my hand. Just like that. So I'm going to put this into my fire lay. And again, this was the lean-to fire lay, where we had one stick up and all the others just pile on top. You can see now that my bundle is in here, it's just going to start burning all these sticks. I don't have to do anything to the fire lay itself. All I have to do is provide a little bit of oxygen. But even then, it's burning pretty well, so I don't really have to give it any extra air right now. I'm just going to because it'll be cool. Because it'll look really cool for you guys, and just to show how well this works. Alright, we've got a fire. Because I did make that a pretty fairly tight tinder bundle, the bundle itself will burn for quite a while. So I don't need to be forcing any extra oxygen, it'll just keep on smoldering. I really like making big tinder bundles that are dense like this because it will burn on its own. It almost is its own kindling for the first few minutes of the fire. Try not to inhale ashes, that isn't very good for you. The old hat trick is always helpful. It's kind of like waving the bundle in figure eights, but once it's in your fire lay. That steady flow of oxygen. Alright, well, thank you guys for coming along with me for this hand drill tutorial. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe, share the video around. I'm teaching this because I love this skill, and I want more people to know about it, how to do it. To keep these skills alive, we have to teach them. The internet's a great source for that. So, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. I do make hand drill sets to sell. If you're interested in one, contact me. I'll have my Etsy store linked on my YouTube page. That's where most of my hand drill sets for sale are, but I can also post them on Facebook and whatever else. So yeah, reach out if you want one. So thanks for watching, and you guys have a good day, and be responsible with your fires.